Voila. Okay, well, it's just past 1:30 in the East, so perhaps we can get started. Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à cet webinaire aujourd'hui. Mon nom c'est Jeff Morrison, je suis le directeur général de la CHRA. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Jeff Morrison. I'm the executive director of the CHRA. Unfortunately, today's moderator was supposed to have been my colleague, Jacob Gorenkoff, who sadly is recuperating from COVID as we speak. So I'm sure we all wish Jacob a very, very speedy recovery. Before I begin, of course, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am currently sitting is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I thank them for letting me live, work, and play on this land. So I'm pretty sure that by now everyone is familiar with Zoom. However, just like in the when you're on a plane, we have to go through kind of like the Zoom safety features. So today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to, you should now be able to see me. In a moment, you'll be hopefully able to see a title screen for today's presentation session and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or telephone if you've dialed in. We are in a webinar format, so you're all muted. If you wish to ask questions, and there will be time for that hopefully at the end, you can type them in the Q&A session on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. Et s'il vous plaît, posez des questions en anglais ou français. We'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Any questions we cannot get to, we will take note and hopefully be able to provide written responses. Donc, aujourd'hui, nous sommes rejoints par 3 représentatifs du Bureau de défenseur fédéral de logement pour discuter du droit de la personne d'un logement et de la manière de résoudre les problèmes systématiques auxquels de nombreuses personnes sont confrontées à travers le pays. So, you may all recall that the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate was created through the right to housing legislation that was passed by Parliament in 2019. And earlier this year, Marie-Josée Houle was named to that post. During today's webinar, you will gain an understanding of the Federal Housing Advocate's unique mandate, including her duties to review and report on systemic housing issues and to monitor the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing in Canada. This webinar will also provide an overview of the new submission tool that will allow you and the public to engage with the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate to report on systemic barriers to housing experiences. So today, we're pleased to be joined by 3 representatives from the Federal Housing Advocate's Office. In no particular order, welcome first to Kyle Lambier, who is a senior advisor with the office. And when he's not working, he is trying his very best to beat me at curling since we play on opposing teams in the same league. Ruby Bissette, who is a research analyst based in Vancouver, et finalement Jessica Loisier, qui est encore un analyste de recherche dans le bureau du défenseur. So Ruby, Jessica, Kyle, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. Merci pour être ici.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for the introduction. We're really excited to be here today to share the work of our office, which has been long in the making. And so I think just without further ado, we'll get straight into the presentation. We're going to start with a quick 2.5-minute video that will give a high-level overview of the mandate of the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate.
Housing is a fundamental human right. Having a safe and secure place to call home helps people and families thrive and succeed. It is central to human dignity, well-being, and community. But a home is more than just a roof and 4 walls. It is protection from the elements, and it is a means to access basic services. It also keeps us safe and healthy. The right to housing means many things. For example, It means you're able to get adequate housing that is affordable and meets your needs. It means you can access housing without discrimination or harassment, and you feel safe in your home. It also means your home should be accessible, like if you have a disability or you're an older person. Many people in Canada still live in housing that does not meet these standards, and many do not have a place to live at all. The National Housing Strategy Act recognizes housing as a fundamental human right. It commits governments to focus on those in greatest housing need, to reform housing laws, policies, and programs through a human rights-based approach, and to involve communities in meaningful ways. The Act also establishes a national housing strategy with accountability tools to help develop and maintain the strategy, including the National Housing Council and the Federal Housing Advocate. The Federal Housing Advocate's mandate is to promote and protect the right to housing across Canada. The Advocate gives those impacted by housing need and homelessness a voice. The Advocate receives submissions from the public on systemic housing issues and uses that information to make recommendations to improve Canada's housing laws, policies, and programs. The Advocate can review the issue. In some cases, they will refer it to the National Housing Council. The Council will establish a review panel to examine the issue more closely and make recommendations. The Advocate doesn't help with individual disputes. If you need help resolving a dispute, you need to go to the Landlord Tenant Board or Human Rights Commission in your province or territory. To make a submission to the Advocate or to find out more about what we do, visit the housing page on the Canadian Human Rights Commission website.
So, like that video said, the focus of the Federal Housing Advocate is really on systemic housing issues, and we thought it would be helpful to share what our working definition of a systemic housing issue is. So for the purposes of interpreting the duties and functions of the Federal Housing Advocate, a systemic housing issue is an issue which inhibits the full and equal enjoyment of the right to adequate housing in Canada and is rooted in the housing system or other public and private market systems. As directed by the Act, the Advocate will prioritize systemic housing issues affecting disadvantaged groups and people experiencing inadequate housing or homelessness. A systemic housing issue can result from, oh, can you go back, please? Thanks. A systemic housing issue can result from or be influenced by actions or inactions by governments or private actors related to legislation, policies, programs, regulations, decision-making processes, spending priorities, business practices, administrative and operational requirements, and/or attitudes. Systemic housing issues often intersect with other forms of disadvantage and discrimination, including colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, and ableism, and stigmatization or discrimination based on poverty, homelessness, or other social condition. Next slide, please. So Marie-Josée Houle is the first Federal Housing Advocate, and she was appointed in February of this year. And in all areas of her mandate, the Advocate will take a systemic and participatory approach with a focus on priority groups. The Federal Housing Advocate doesn't take on individual cases. Rather, her mandate is to drive change on systemic housing issues by advocating for changes to laws, policies, and programs that affect the right to housing. So instead of winning the right to housing for one person at a time, these changes will improve access to adequate housing for all people across Canada. In all areas of her work, the Advocate will ensure a meaningful voice and role for affected individuals and communities in upholding the right to adequate housing. This means taking a participatory approach and working with individuals and communities directly affected by homelessness and inadequate housing. And the National Housing Strategy Act directs the Advocate to focus on groups facing systemic disadvantage in housing, including Indigenous peoples, racialized communities, people with disabilities, older adults, recent immigrants and refugees, people living on low incomes, 2S LGBTQI+ people, and particularly women and gender diverse people within these groups. The Office of the Federal Housing Advocate continues to expand this list, recognizing that other groups also face disproportionate homelessness and inadequate housing. Next slide, please. So I'll just go over briefly broadly the activities that our office is involved in and some of the duties. So firstly, we have a duty to monitor the progressive realization to the right to housing in Canada, and this includes monitoring the implementation of the National Housing Strategy. We're engaged in a number of areas of research and have commissioned different pieces of research and reports around implementing the right to housing, the financialization of housing, evictions and security of tenure, and encampments. We are tasked with receiving and analyzing submissions on systemic housing issues, and that's what the presentation today is mainly focused on, that function. And from there, we also work on reviewing systemic housing issues or referring them for a hearing before a review panel formed by the National Housing Council. Next slide, please. So to kind of hone in on that, that third duty around receiving submissions from the public, our housing submission tool that we've just launched is really the primary window for the public to engage with the Federal Housing Advocate. When we think about this idea of progressively realizing the human right to housing, in order to understand how we do that, and also whether we're successful, we really need to put people with lived experience at the center. And that's why it's so important for individuals and organizations who are all experts in their own right to engage in this process. Even though the advocate doesn't address individual issues, as the submissions start to roll in, what we expect to see are common threads between people's stories and experiences. And we'll see a more collective story emerge about why people are experiencing housing inadequacy and homelessness. So receiving these submissions really helps the advocate to understand systemic housing issues and who is impacted. They help her make recommendations to the government and other decision makers to improve Canada's housing laws, policies, and programs. They help raise awareness on the most common and critical housing issues people are facing. They'll help the advocate hold governments to account on their obligations to address housing need and homelessness across Canada. And they help to drive change on key systemic housing issues and advance the right to housing for all. Next slide, please. Just some other points we wanted to highlight about this tool. This is a brand new process for us and kind of a pilot project at this point. And so as you engage with the tool, if you have questions that come up, if you have feedback, if you're looking for clarification, we really welcome anything that comes up for you that you want to ask about or share with us. As Jeff said, like, we're happy to also answer questions, over email, and our inbox is available on the website if you want to get in touch with us. And while this tool is really great, really important, and we think it's going to have a very broad reach to people, we recognize that a web tool is not necessarily accessible to everyone. And so we have a few other options of ways folks can engage with the advocate. So we can receive submissions by email, snail mail, and through a telephone partnership. We have downloadable forms available on the website. Currently, they're just in English and French, but we are expecting to have them translated into some Indigenous languages and some other languages in the coming months. And those can be printed off and mailed or scanned or anything. And for clients who need, or for individuals who need extra assistance, we have this telephone service, 1-888-214-1090. And there are operators on that service who can guide an individual through filling out the web tool, or they can fill it out for them as well on their behalf. Next slide, please. So after a submission is made, users of the tool will be able to go back and edit their submissions before they are reviewed. And at a certain point, the submissions will be reviewed and we'll consider them in relation to others that we're receiving to kind of start to understand those systemic housing issues, the common threads that are coming through. All submissions will be part of the advocate's annual report and will inform her recommendations to the minister responsible for housing. Users whose submissions are referred for further review, either for an advocate-led review or to a review panel, those individuals will be contacted directly. And those whose submissions were not referred for further review will receive written notice at the end of the year with an explanation of why we weren't able to review their submission. So I think that's going to be it for me, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica now, who will lead us through a demonstration of the web tool.
Okay, thank you, Ruby. I'll just close this, open the web tool, and share my screen again. All right, so, oops. Are you not seeing my screen now?
I see it now. I see the tweet. Yep.
Sorry. All right, okay, so for this part of the presentation, we'll just go over the web tool. We've realized with the submissions that are coming in now officially launched for a week, it could take more than 10 to 15 minutes as we've first announced. So some people are taking a lot more time putting some extra details and information, which is great, but it's just something to consider. So today, if we don't, I'll just go over it briefly. Please, if there's anything you want me to go more precisely on or precision while I'm doing the demonstration, you could put in some comments and then we could go back to some of the specifics if any questions on the maybe technicalities of the tool. So this is the page you see when you first click on the link. Ruby mentioned just earlier the downloadable form, so that's where you would find a form and be able to download it. Same, if you go sur la version française, vous cliquez sur le français, et puis même chose, le formulaire va pouvoir être téléchargeable aussi au même endroit. Donc, on the English version, we're going down, scrolling, you have some options here with maybe more some technical information. On the submission tool, when you go down, you're able to start the submission for yourself or on behalf of someone else. So this would be like the individual section of the tool. And then below you have the organization section of the submission tool. Here's where you're able to go back to a submission that's already been started, for example, or one that has been completed and you want to go back to it and, for example, make some changes, or you could also, in any cases, you'd be able to withdraw, for example, and delete your submissions. That's where you're able to go back. So for this demo, we'll go in the individual side of the submission tool. This is because I'm already logged in, so I have this question twice. Usually you wouldn't see something like that, so. Okay, so you get to the privacy statement here. Again, you're able to expand these sections and access all the information regarding how we protect your information, how you're able to access it, correct it, how we store it, and then how we protect the information again. So, I mean, basically, this is where you would find information on the privacy statement. So you do have to acknowledge that before going to the first question. Okay, here is first question regarding housing issues. So just briefly for the understanding of the submitters, and then for probably some of you guys that might be able to refer the tool to other people. The first section is going to ask a series of questions about personal experiences with inadequate housing or homelessness. And then the second part of the tool is going to ask some social economic information questions. And that's where you'll be able to provide personal information, and then any more personal contact information as well, for us to be able to contact you afterwards as well, if that is necessary for us. So so if the person does need immediate assistance, the person could select yes, for example, and that will prompt them to the emergency contacts. We do have, for example, 911 and then 211, which is a partner of ours. So 211 connects people to the right information in case of any specific immediate assistance or problems that they would need help on for an emergency, not necessarily an emergency, but for assistance with a problem that has to be solved immediately, I say. So that reminds us also that the federal housing advocate will not provide immediate assistance or remedies to individuals for specific housing disputes in general. So they are available 24 hours a day in more than 150 languages, and they're able to assist people by phone, chat, text, and web. So they're very available. The website is also listed below. So this is additional information. If you click no, that will just disappear. Here you have the first question of the submission tool. So you're able to select more than one. So the housing issue listed that are actually aligned with the human rights approach. So it draws from the 7 entitlements to housing, but the list was also inspired from the office's engagement, research, and consultation with partners. Like I said, you're able to select more than one. For a person that selects, for example, the discrimination category here, that person at the end would be referred to the commission triage tool. So in the case they would want to file an individual complaint for discrimination. For the purpose of the demo, we'll just select one because those questions generate some sub-questions. As you can see now, for example, if someone selected a problem with unaffordable housing, you would have to select anything that applies to their situation or applied to their situation. Again, they're able to select as many as applies to their situation. So the tool provides also additional, text box that are open text fields throughout the tool. So the person is able to state like an individual experience, provide any details, dates, again, like it's written right here. Anecdotes or personal stories, that's where we'll get more information or more details about everyone's experience. So that for us, we do encourage you guys that are making the submissions to give us the most information you're able to provide. That's where it's going to be interesting when we're doing the analysis of the collected submissions. So we get to the government actions and access to justice page. So this section allows the individual to propose a desired solution to the housing issue or desired action that the government should consider, for example. There is a lot of space for that the submitter to put as much information as wanted. It could be different, for example, programs or housing issues that are facing. So it could be more than one. And the goal here is to give the person to participate in the solutions of their own issues as it is aligned with the human rights based legislation. So that is the next section. When you scroll down, the person is able to explain if they've accessed individual recourse mechanism. It could be, for example, family members or something about like a legal clinic, shelter, or drop-in. Again, you're able to select as many as applies to your situation. And just below, you can also provide more details on your experience, providing again dates or any other details. When you go down, you also have you are also able to provide information if you've ever accessed to justice or if you've made an official complaint or claim about your issue. So if your answer is yes, then you have all of those sub answers, I would say. Again, you're able to select all of the answers that apply. And if you click no, those will just disappear. And you can go to the next question. Again, this is still in the first section where we're asking questions about the personal experiences with inadequate housing or homelessness. So we get to the questions about living in housing situation. So this will inform us on how a person occupies a dwelling, which will determine also how they hold their right to housing. So for example, if a person is living, is their owner, a renter, they could also say that they are staying in someone else's place because they have no place of their own. And then if you click, for example, in living in another housing situation, considering that none of these would apply to your own situation, then you would have to scroll down and you would have an extended list of precarious form of housing tenure, for example. And then again, if none of these apply to your situation, you're able to select none of these apply to my situation and type in exactly your current living situation. So just for the sake of this, we could say that you're a renter. When you go down here, you have the question asking how many people are listed like officially on your, if you're a renter on your lease. So we could say that for the purpose of this, that you are two-person living on in your household, that your landlord, for example, is a private company or individual. When you go down, you have an additional question asking about the type of building you're living in. So that could be, for example, an apartment. And then you have to precise if your apartment is part of the condominium development. You could say no. And you could say that, for example, you're living in a building that is with fewer than 5 stories. So we get to the last question of the first section of the tool, I would say, about history with eviction and homelessness. So again, here, if the submitter has ever been forced to move out from a place they've rented, they have to click yes here. Again, they're able to provide more information on the box, open box here, and they are able to provide any times, any times that your landlord forced you to move out. So it could include, again, like dates or any specifics on your experiences. Again, here you have more details to provide if that is the case. And then the last one is a question about homelessness. So this question captures hidden homelessness as well. So we do provide a short definition here. The definition includes, for example, staying outside in a vehicle or abandoned building, or any other time that you did not have a safe place of your own. So if any of these fit with your own experience, you say yes, and that's where you are able to provide even more details on your personal experiences with homelessness. So when that first happened to you, and then when was your most recent experience. And again, here we're encouraging you guys to provide as much information as you're willing to share with us, and that's possible to do so in the last box right here. So we get to the section about personal information. Like, I don't want to go too much in details with this one, but it's still very relevant. Again, like if there are sections that you wish to have more, or if you have questions on any of these, I would be happy to go back to any specifics with you if that is the case. So we do ask the submitter to provide personal contact information. Some of them are not mandatory, but we do ask for a first name, a city, a email. Let me just put that in because I don't think I have. Oh, I do have it, but it's my personal stuff. Okay. And then I'll put and then so we asked the email. I think we asked the province as well. We just don't have the small star right here, but we asked the email because that's how we are going to contact the submitters whose submission could be retained for a more in-depth analysis. So it could be an advocate-led review, as we mentioned before, or it could be a review panel as well. So that's where we ask for the email. Again, the email will be useful if you want to go back to your submission and make some changes to your answers. Again, if someone is helping you doing a submission, or if you're doing, for example, the submission on behalf of someone else, you click here, yes, and you're able to provide the person's helping you contact information as well. Okay, so we get to the demographic information questions. So the first part is about gender and sexual orientation. So the office does put particular focus on ensuring that housing is equitable and accessible to everyone without discrimination. So this section will help us understand how diverse groups may experience unmet housing needs or inadequate housing. So usually those are pretty well understood. However, we do have the definitions if anyone is not unsure of the term that we're using. And then there's a list of the definitions as well. You scroll down here again, all of this question, most of the questions have those question marks. And then that's where you will find a definition if they're not listed below for the question itself. So do you identify as trans or non-binary? You could say that you're not sure. And then how you describe your sexual orientation. Again, definitions are available. For all of those questions in the demographic information section, you're able to skip those and say, for example, that you'd rather not answer that question. So for all of the questions and answers in the demographic information section, we attempted to explain intersectionality in plain language. So that's why the definitions are there. We've also tried to include as many categories as we could, but we have to keep in mind that this, like the data we're collecting has to be compared with already existing data. So that's why we are matching the information that's collected in the census for most of these. So that's why, for example, you see like the list for race and racial identity is kind of limited. So for example, if a submitter wants to put more specific category for race and racial identity, the person would be able to specify and type directly what their race and racial identity is. If that's not the case, they're able to say, for example, they identify as Latin American, even if they're born or Mexican, for example. Okay, so sorry, I skipped the first question. So are you First Nations, Métis, or Inuit? If you click yes, so you do have a selection to make also for the options that apply. You could say that you are Métis, and then again, you would be able to provide a specific tribes below. And same again, if you say none of these apply to your situation, you have an open text box where you could specify your settlement. Let me just put back this here. Let's select just white for this demonstration. Again, you have a question here below about ethnic origin and ancestry. If you do click on Indigenous origins, you're able to scroll down. Let me just, yeah. You're able to scroll down, for example, and make your selection. And you could add more than one depending on your personal background, right? So here you're able to be very precise with your origins. When you scroll down, this question is about religion and spiritual affiliations. Again, you're able to select more than one, but you could say that you have, for example, no religion, or you'd rather not answer that specific question for any specific reasons. And then again, like those lists eventually will be evolving, of course, as the world is changing, as you know. So if the census is changing the categories, then we will be able to update the submission tool as well eventually. Some more demographic information. So here you're able to provide precise what year you're born, place of birth. We could go a bit into this one. I think it's interesting. If you're born, for example, outside Canada, this is where you have the immigration status questions. So where were you born? And the year you arrived in Canada, for example. And that's where you're able to provide your immigration or Canadian status, whatever it is. Or you could say that, for example, you don't know. You could say that none of these apply. And then again, you're able to provide more information. Let me just select something just for now. Okay, we do have a question about the disability status. The definitions are also available. And then this question includes anyone in the household, so not only the submitter. So if you, for example, you identify or someone else in your family identify as a person with a disability under the Act, if you click yes, again, you're able to provide more information on what type of disability that applies to your in the person or yourself in the household. Okay, and the last one on this page is about language. Again, if you click on Indigenous, you're able to select the specific Indigenous languages that applies to your first languages, or we are precising that it's first languages that are, for example, spoken at home, but it could be also any that that you feel comfortable communicating in. So it could be, for example, a Mohawk and in English as well. So I think we have a last page. Yeah, this last page about income information. So this is where the submitter will be able to provide information about the household's income. So this will help us determine the financial status of a household, along with, for example, sources of income, and then who is facing financial hardship and then why. So again, here you have the question mark that you're able to provide that precise a bit more what we're looking for in that question. So it could be any type of income, and that's where we're listing all the types of income that could be included in that answer. So let's say, for example, monthly income for 2 people. Okay. And then here we're asking something about your monthly housing costs. So this is in everything that you are able to include that in that question, I'm sorry. So it could be electricity, heat, water, internet, municipal services, etc. So that could be quite a lot of things. And then you're able here to provide more information on the sources of income that you are getting. So it could be full-time employment, and then anything really that could be included, you're able to specify any other sources of income, for example. Here, okay. Okay, and let me just go. So we do have some questions also about financial hardship. So those questions have to be answered from very difficult to very easy. We don't have to go into all of these specifics. So we're able to, for example, click here and say that you'd rather not answer the financial hardship questions. That's a possibility as well. Household type and size, we can skip those questions as well. But this question is important for us to understand if the household is suitable for the number of people living in it. And we also have a question here saying how many people live in your household. So this one is different from the one we had previously, since this could count some people that would not be, for example, on the housing lease. So you would have people unofficially living couch surfing, for example, in your household. Let's skip this for now. And then we get to the last question about member of priority groups. So as you know, some groups do face systemic barriers to adequate and affordable housing, and they have been identified as a priority for the National Housing Strategy. So this is a list that is available for considering. This question includes not only the submitter again, but anyone living in the household. So you're able to select all of the categories that apply to your household. And then it could repeat some of the questions that's already provided, but for us, for the analysis, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be a bit going more broad for us to understand who is facing housing issues and which groups is more specifically, right? So for the case of just here, we'll just select a couple of ones, for example, and then when you scroll down, you're able to preview all of your answers. Okay, and again, you're able to make some edits if that's what you wish. You scroll down, and finally, you'll be able to submit your submission. I won't do it now because we all have to delete it after, but as soon as you make your submission, you will receive an email, and that email, you'll have a PDF format with all of your answers and then the questions also. And you will receive information on how to go back to your submission if you want to make some changes to it. So let me stop sharing my screen. If it seems to be working. I guess now I could hand it back to you, Jeff, for maybe some short period of question. Again, I know some of you have been writing questions in the chat, so that could take place also. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Merci, Jessica, and also, of course, Ruby and Kyle for the overview of the tool. And yes, there have been a number of questions that have been coming in, and maybe I'll start it, and this is in no particular order, but one that I thought was really a fascinating question is, what is the threshold for triggering a review or making recommendations for policy change? Is this established on a more sort of qualitative basis based on the form and the information received, or more quantitative based on the number of submissions on a particular systemic issue? There's a part B to that, but maybe I'll just allow you to focus on that first.
Would you like me to go there, Jess and Irvi? Okay, sure. So this is a great question, and it's something that we're still working through. What we've done and waiting for the advocate to be appointed is worked on systems just like this to look at how, when we're speaking with the public and conducting research and begin to receive these submissions, how exactly we would land upon identifying a particular topic. So that work is still underway, and we hope to have something more official published on the website soon. But the way that we've been looking at it now is for identifying systemic issues is like topics and issues may emerge from the submissions, of course, the research, our monitoring work, engagement, or other activities. And then by applying the definition that we shared of systemic housing issues, we'll scope the issue down from the broader topic area. In our work, we'll also prioritize issues looking more specifically at the human rights considerations. So severity of the impacts, breadth of the impacts, and then the priority groups of greatest disadvantage and or Indigenous groups as well. We'll determine what's required for moving for next steps. So we'll begin to gather research and evidence, engage with rights holders and duty bearers, and examine policies. We'll check in, of course, with the National Housing Council and others, and look just more generally on what is being done on this issue. And someone in the comments, rather the Q&A folder, had asked, you know, I think it was, I'm not going to say the name, but anyway, that pointed out that a lot of work has been done, and that's exactly what we hope to find out as we engage on issues, is to be put in contact with, on a regional basis, on an academic basis, on working with Indigenous partners, whomever, disadvantaged groups, civil society, being made aware of additional research, including, you know, literature reviews that have been done. Certainly we've done a number preparing for the arrival of the advocate. We'll prioritize the issue, looking at issues of capacity. So in referring the issue to the National Housing Council, we do look at capacity. We look at the strategic impact, opportunities to affect the housing system, what other processes are underway. There's a lot of processes that are either underway or have been completed by the House of Commons, Senate studies, etc. You know, other levels of government. We meet with the National Housing Council on a quarterly basis, but we have mid-quarter meetings to discuss with the co-chairs, like what issues are emerging in their work, what's emerging in our work with engagement, etc. And then determine the intervention, like reconsider the scope of the work and select further intervention. So like not all issues will be ready to go forward right away. Like we will have to do further research and engagement. We'll have to look at, you know, we have other tools too that might better scope the issue. Not all issues, and especially with the diversity of issues that are at play, you know, advocate-led reviews and referrals are kind of like going to be held. There's only so much capacity to do them in a year. So we're looking at other tools, you know, like offering letters of concern and support. We can do recommendations to the minister. And we're just kind of figuring out those kinds of tools right now, actually in engagement too. Meeting with stakeholders and saying, you know, what kinds of interventions would be welcomed, will be effective, how can we amplify work that's already underway? Not all issues need to go for a hearing necessarily or have additional work to it. We're really looking to build upon what's effectively been done. We're not entering a new space, we know that, and looking at scoping issues. So in the time that Mary Jose has been appointed, which is about 3 months now, we're just in the engagement phase and looking at those issues now. Hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Thanks, Kyle. And just as a part B to that question, and knowing and understanding, building on your last point, that it is still early days and that the submission tool was just launched not too long ago, but understanding that, one of the questions was, you know, would any review triggered have a local or provincial, territorial or federal implication for recommendations? and intervention. So again, knowing that it's perhaps premature to have any kind of real life experience in terms of what the advocates' reports will look like, do you anticipate that there would be possibly, municipal or provincial territorial implications? And maybe just as a side note to that, have you had discussions with municipalities or the provinces and territories in terms of, getting them on side with any recommendations that that the advocate might put forward?
Right, that's helpful. Yeah. So we do, just to answer the question, like really upfront and certain and plain, we do expect that recommendations will bridge beyond the federal jurisdiction. Housing is an issue of shared jurisdiction, and in speaking, Marie-Josée speaking with the minister, but also with the provinces and territories, I think only last week, there's broad agreement on that and interest, I would say. The reception at the deputy minister level, at least with provinces and territories, was warm and one of interest. I think that it's early days. No issue's been selected as of yet, of course. But there is interest on the part of provinces to track and monitor this. Of course, the federal recommendations, because we're a federal oversight body, are easily placed with the minister responsible for this, which is Minister Hussein at the moment. That being said, with Marie-Josée's advocate-led reviews, they can be broader, both in examination and recommendations. Where the legislation is a little bit more narrow is that when Marie-Josée, the federal advocate, refers issues to the National Housing Council, they form a panel and they look more exclusively at the issue of jurisdiction, whereas Marie-Josée's, the federal advocate's reviews are a little bit broader. That being said, there's nothing really restricting making observations, even in the National Housing Council work with their review panels of saying, these mechanisms could be made more effective this way or that way. So it's yet to be seen, but certainly the recommendations on the panel part would be federal, but there's probably room and openness to explore with making observations.
Thanks, Kyle. A question that we've had a couple times now is, although it's been acknowledged of the importance of having someone with lived experience, someone experiencing issues or problems firsthand, ideally be able to make a submission, the questions come up that would the advocate still be okay accepting submissions made on behalf of people with lived experience or people that may not be able to fill in this form, or people that are not directly experiencing any sort of systemic issues, but are doing so more on behalf of a sector?
I want to go take that one.
The answer is yes. So in the first part, if someone isn't able to make a submission for themselves, there's a part in the form where you can say, I'm making this submission on behalf of someone else. There's also an option for organizations to make submissions based on the groups of people that they're serving and the issues that are coming up for them. And I also, to pick up on that last point, and I saw a comment in the chat about this, there's on that kind of first page that you get to where it says like select which housing issues you're experiencing, there's actually a box that you can check that just says, I want to make a comment on a policy or program. I think it's worded something like that. So I think that's that's an opportunity to, even if you're not experiencing a systemic housing issue yourself, that's an opportunity to make a comment on something or make a suggestion.
Thank you. I have a question en français et après ça, peut-être je peux poser une ou deux plus en anglais. Donc la question en français, l'outil, c'est un outil intéressant, mais la personne dit que la longueur du questionnaire peut être réduisante pour les personnes fragiles. Pour quelles raisons les questions sur les aspects financiers et taille du logement ont-elles été jugées facultatives? Donc, juste dire pourquoi est-ce que la longueur du questionnaire est assez long et Jessica, peut-être c'est une question pour vous.
Oui, merci. Je pense que c'est la question de Claire. Bonne question, vraiment. C'est sûr qu'on voulait faire l'outil le plus accessible pour tous. Donc, c'est sûr que on veut inclure en même temps, on veut inclure toutes les catégories possibles, toutes les questions possibles. oui, c'est assez long. On réalise que c'est assez long comme questionnaire, mais il y a possibilité de commencer, faire une soumission fermée. On peut y retourner 2 jours plus tard avec notre adresse courriel. Vous allez pouvoir retourner à votre soumission, à vos observations. Donc, c'est possible de le faire en plusieurs sections, je dirais. Encore une fois, vous pouvez aller chercher de l'aide. Il va y avoir le 211 qui va pouvoir vous aider. Qui va pouvoir vous référer, puis aussi Service Canada peut faire au téléphone avec vous pour une personne encore plus fragile. Donc, il y a les 2 options. On comprend que c'est assez long. Pour ce qui est, par exemple, des questions facultatives, c'est toutes les questions démographiques qui sont facultatives. Donc, on ne voulait pas obliger personne à partager de l'information personnelle. Donc, toutes les questions de la 2e section sont facultatives. Vous allez pouvoir les passer à la suivante pour toutes ces questions-là, sauf pour le prénom, l'adresse courriel, la ville et puis la province qui sont le minimum là, que vous devez nous fournir. Mais sinon, tout le reste est facultatif. Donc, c'est sûr qu'à ce moment-là, pour une personne qui peut pas faire une soumission ou pas donner des informations pendant 15 minutes, pourrait à ce moment-là décider de sauter là, les dernières questions, par exemple, si c'est trop long pour cette personne, par exemple.
And just on that subject of the type of questions that the tool has, someone was asking why, or Lori was asking, why is internet being included in the housing costs? It hadn't been there previously in previous definitions.
Personally, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I wasn't here when they drafted the definition, so maybe I don't know if Carl knows this detail. I don't know if you worked on this when, but I know they consulted, so they have they took this definition from somewhere. So
yeah, so on utilities, we added internet because first of all, we started receiving letters on it even before this tool was made available. And in almost all cases, this data is comparable. So we are rarely asking a question where there isn't data to back it up. So we'll be able to go back to departments that offer this kind of funding. We've seen it in federal budgets before, where it's facilitating access to rural communities mainly, but also affordability. I think it's seen as an economic enabling sector area. Like people need internet nowadays to function. I mean, like look what just happened these last 2 terrible years where we, had to stay home and rely on this tool. So I think that we've taken note of not only the letters that we've received, but in most cases, we're able to track it back to comparable data. So it's now considered as not as essential as water and heat and cooling, but it's pretty up there.
Fair point. Yeah. And ironically, here we are on internet having a conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe just in the time we have, there's 2 more themed questions that have popped up. The first is, and a couple folks have asked this, will information on the submissions that you receive, will they be available, say, in a public online database somewhere, or will they just be more sort of aggregated within the annual report? Essentially, how will that information about the types of submissions, the type of issues that you're receiving, how, if at all, will that be shared publicly?
For sure. So absolutely, it will be included in the Advocates Annual Report as part of an aggregate format. We realize that not all issues will go to the point of an advocate-led review or a hearing that was referred by the federal advocate to the National Housing Council, but we do want to represent the issues, and it does garner a lot of importance. So in the early part of the mandate, you'll 100% be able to post the issues in an aggregate format in the annual report, but the commission is a department like others. So we're subject to the open data policy, which means that we'll have to post the data that we receive in one format and another. I would say at this point, it's a little early for us to understand exactly how we would present the information. We've had early discussions and said it'd probably be more easy for us to share the qualitative information, just respecting the privacy rules. So it's something that we have to work through, but there's government policies in place that compel us to share the information. I just don't know entirely what format it will look like quite yet.
Fair point. Thanks, Kyle. Still early days, so understood. Maybe just a final question in the time we have that's come up is this notion of not wanting to duplicate the work that's been already done and out there. And Kyle, I think it was you who mentioned that, you're fully aware that, of course, you're not entering a new space, that obviously there's been a lot of work done on this. There was a concern raised that, some folks might see this as, in fact, just doing that they may not actually want to share similar inputs or similar information again. Are you doing sort of reviews, literature reviews, study reviews to ensure that there's that issue of potential duplication is being addressed? And David just asked the one very specific question as to whether there's been any lit reviews done on the issue or the duty to provide shelter and encampments, which of course is a very timely issue.
Yes. So the short answer is yes. We've been looking at lit reviews in the 7 entitlements of housing, particularly, which launched it, and we did a cross-sectional analysis with the disadvantaged groups as well as Indigenous groups in each of those areas. So we had a quite broad one completed. And as issues are identified or submitted, we are collecting literature reviews. There's a lot of work out there, as mentioned. So one thing that we are careful to ask for when we're meeting with folks is if they're able to share or point us to new resources, then we take it. And I saw someone's question about the idea of posting things and studies online. I really like that idea. As part of our mandate and tracking duty, we also hope to have an electronic tool at one time that posts existing obligations, but also tracks the recommendations and looks at the government's follow through. So all to say is we have done literature reviews, we continue to do them. As the issue areas get identified, we'll continue to dig down. Very specifically at encampments, there is work that's been completed. It's an issue on the advocates' radar, and actually a lit review, I believe, has been done, as well as a media scan. So I think in the by the fall, we'll have more information about the issues that are on the radar of the advocate, although I know that she's spoken at the last CHRA conference and gave a bit of a teaser of issues that were prepared for her. So we would encourage you to keep engaging with our office. Your relationship as individuals and organizations isn't entirely defined by the submission tool, but it certainly makes the issue direct, and we're able to more quickly see exactly what what issues and systemic issues are on people's minds. So maybe I'll just stop my answer there.
Thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you, of course, Ruby and Jessica, for your presentations. I just want to point out, I think, and this partially goes to a question I know just Mary posed, that this office and the functions of it are very unique, not just in Canada, but frankly, globally. And so in many ways, you're breaking new ground, not just domestically, but internationally. And so I think there'll be a lot of folks really keenly interested in the work you do and the impacts. And so thank you for, breaking this new ground again on a Canadian, but very much on an international level. So there will be more information to come. As we've all said, this submission tool is still pretty brand new. And so a lot of work to be done. I know I heard from someone prior to this that there's already been a significant number of submissions received. So it's definitely a tool that is already in use, and we look forward to hearing from all of you with it. So donc avec ça, un très grand merci de nous tous à la CRU, à notre participant pour d'être ici, et encore merci à Ruby, Jessica et Kyle pour votre présentation très informative. My final note is that we will be sharing the presentation that was delivered today with all of you, all registered participants, so you will get a copy of the slides that were available. Donc avec ça, une fois encore, merci. Thank you all. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Merci une fois encore.